if we knew how important it was, how it could unlock the keys to our potential, everyone would run to study it. So I'm really, really glad that you've given it a platform, alhamdulillah. So when we were first asked to talk about this, one of the key things that Dr. Adil said was, look, don't worry about time. I want you to do the subject justice. And I love that, because again, this is a subject that it definitely needs that, reviving our lost legacy. We want amazing, we want great, and that's not going to happen overnight, right? So something to do that, it does need a process. It does need we need to think. So what we've done is that we've put together something really, really comprehensive to take you through the entire end-to-end sort of journey. So we're not going to just talk about the amazing achievements of the past. We also want to talk about how did the decline take place? But then most importantly, we want it to be solutions focused. We want to talk about, okay, well, how can the revival begin again? So here's what we're going to cover. So we'll do a really quick introduction into myself, into Sophia, and also into the organization. And then the first part of it will go into understanding our legacy and the golden age. So this is the history side of it. So in that, we'll talk about why study history. Why is that so important? Then Sister Sophia will talk about the science and technological revolution. Then we'll go into what does a golden age environment look like. So we'll look at Baghdad, Cordoba, and the culture of that time. And then we'll look at the role of women in Islamic society. And then what we'll do is that we'll move over to how the decline happened, and then the impact of that on us today. And then so that's where Sister Sophia will go into the challenging the decline narrative. Did the Islamic intellectual age decline, or was it destroyed? Then we'll go over to, how society was engineered through the school system. So as Dr. Adil mentioned, the school system and the education system is in serious need of revamping. So we look at that. And then we look at the Ummah in crisis. And then my favorite part is how do we revive the Ummah and bring about a second golden age, inshallah. And so stage one is the vision, understanding the big picture and beginning with the end in mind. So what are we trying to achieve and how are we going to get there? What's the roadmap forward? Then we're going to look at the stage two, which is looking at individual change. So bottom up, how do we do that? And then we're going to look at the macro change. So systematic, top-down culture and institutional change. And then we'll have a bit of a conclusion at the end, and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A and discussion. So as you can see, it's a very packed schedule. So I'll move forward.
Sorry, Brother Faisal. Sorry, I'm just interrupting. There was someone who wished to ask a question. I think if we just got that out of the way, because I
sure, yeah, go for it.
Forgot to entertain that when I was
yes, of course, yeah, no problem.
So, Brother Al-Amin, if you wish to ask your question, please go ahead. Apologies that I didn't take a question and answer after my session. Brother Al-Amin. No, that's fine. I mean,
okay,
that's fine. Inshallah, we'll just continue.
No problem. So just to introduce myself really quickly. So I'm a serial entrepreneur with a keen passion to revive the profound impact that Muslims once had on the world, right? So in terms of what I do day to day, so in terms of my background, I was once a lawyer. I was also a retail buyer. And then I was also a data analyst, a project manager. I did copywriting, and I've done all sorts. This is what happens when you're on the search for your purpose. You end up going from here to there to everywhere. But where did I find purpose? It was actually in elevating Muslims, and helping Muslims to reach their potential. So today I have two companies. One is which is an education and training company aimed at helping the next generation of Muslim thinkers, innovators, scientists, and creatives to find their purpose, fulfill their potential, and have more impact on the world. And in terms of entrepreneurship, that's another passion of mine. And so I'm a co-founder at a company called Muslim CEO, which is a training and marketing consultancy aiming at mentoring and advising Muslims to have more income, more impact. Just a little note on that. One of the I've probably spoken to 500 or 600 Muslim brothers and sisters around the world, and when you dig deep enough, everyone always wants to do something purposeful. When you dig deeper, what, I'd love to open a charity at one day. I'd love to do this. I'd love to do that. What always prevents them? Time. Oh, I just don't have the time. Oh no, I just don't have the money. And so one of the reasons why Muslim CEO exists is to solve that actual problem. So, okay, you know what? Let's get you to a stage where you've got a way to have more time again. You've got a way to actually earn more money, and so then you can actually do what your purpose actually is. So these two companies actually work hand in hand, which is to help people actually discover their purpose. And just a bit more about myself. I'm an avid reader. I write a lot, so I've got a blog, and what things I'm interested in: psychology, history, personal development, purpose, and polymathy, as you mentioned earlier. So that's a bit about me. Safia, over to you. You to introduce yourself.
Thank you for that. Firstly, I'd really like to thank Brother Adil for having us, and a little bit about myself. Bismillah. So I'm a researcher and a philosopher who envisions this intellectual revival in the Ummah. I've always thought about this. I don't know since when I've had this idea. What if we could have the golden age back? From the day I actually learned what the golden age, the Islamic golden age was. But then what we're going to cover, inshallah, in the session is that the Quran was at the center of our greatness. So we can only have that through the Quran-centric worldview. So that's my vision, inshallah. So my education is that I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm also the content director at No, our organization, and the Second Golden Age, which is a series of videos, articles, podcasts, and a lot of stuff actually, all covering the first intellectual revolution in Islam, which happened to be like the first international intellectual revolution in history, and how we can revive that again using the same principles. So we cover that in this series, the Second Golden Age. And I also, alhamdulillah, produced in collaboration with a media house in the UAE, the first HD film that documented the role of the Quran in inspiring the Islamic scientific revolution. Remember, the scientific revolution, whenever we hear that word, it's all about, okay, the European, you're talking about the 17th century European scientific revolution. But actually, the first scientific revolution is what happened in the Muslim world. Everything before that cannot really be called science. It can be called pre-science, pre-modern even, if we are to use that word in different sense. It's pre-science. But then when you see the actual methods of science being used, you actually see that in the Muslim world. So I document that in this documentary, and I actually talk about the role of the Quran, which you don't find anywhere. You find a lot of historical stuff, but you don't actually find this idea of how the Quran can drive a scientific revolution. At least I've never found that anywhere, except for obviously some books and articles, very academic stuff. So then, because I was interested in this field, so I did my MA in philosophy. So I'm interested in the philosophy of science, and I'm also interested in Islamic eschatology, which is ilmul akhir zaman, because we have to understand the inception of science and the inception of this technological age all comes under the purview of Akhir Zaman. We are Akhir Zaman. So it has to be understood from the lens of Ilm al-Akhir Zaman. I'm a lifelong learner who aims to integrate the two vast areas of Islam and science. Now, this is a huge area that we can cover. There's so many things that have to be covered in this field, but then inshallah, what I wish to do is I want to integrate this huge, vast field with the extremely infinite field of Islamic eschatology, inshallah. That's from my side.
Perfect. So I'll do a little bit of an intro into our kind of backstory. I mean, towards the end of the presentation, I'll go into a little bit more, because essentially our organization exists to try and revive the golden age, inshallah. But it wasn't always the case. So we're actually 10 years old this year. And so back in 2012, I went to a retreat in Cape Town, South Africa. And one of the things that inspired me, there was actually two things. There was like 200 people there. And one was that there was people from all sorts of backgrounds. And there was everyone was united. That was the first thing I noticed, that everyone was quite united. No matter what sect they were from, etc. It just wasn't an issue. And obviously I'm from the north of the UK, and I had grown up with a lot of sort of sectarianism and stuff. So that was one amazing thing to see. The second thing I saw was all of these people were very united in discussing solutions. And not only just discussing solutions, they were talking about Islam as the solution. They were saying, oh, Islam has got the key to the environmental problem. Islam has got the key to the economic problem. Islam has got the key to the, this problem, that problem. And I was like, my mind was blown, because I had never, ever heard Islam talked about in this way. I was, for me, my Islamic education was very much, you go to the mosque, you pray, and you read the Quran, and that's it. Not really much beyond that. So for me, it was like, wow, this is really empowering, and I got hooked. I was like, you know what, I need to come home. I need to share this with my local community. So there was no intention at all to like launch an organization or anything. It was just, let me just put a conference on, and the conference was called Clarity About Reality. And the aim of it was actually essentially it had unity at the back of my mind, but the way it was looking at all the problems of the world, all of us are facing it. So the problem with the economic system, we all face it. The problem with the problem with media, we all face it. The problem with health and foods industry, we all face it. So we had different scholars from different backgrounds who all shared a stage, who were talking about these different issues. And what was amazing was the feedback from it was, oh my God, we need something like this. And it kind of just spawned an organization. So this is where the next few years, we had a lot of, alhamdulillah, really, really good growth. And we focused, as Sabrina alluded to, on primarily things, providing solutions and articles and conferences on understanding the world, primarily through the lens of end times eschatology. Right, so this is all prophesied to happen. This is what we need to do. This is what we need to think. It was that kind of thing. We got to sort of 2016, and we were sort of thinking that, look, we don't want to be sort of doom and gloom, right? And we found that we were very it wasn't growing as fast as it should be, And so we looked at, look, what are we trying to solve? We had to square one. Look, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? What we realized, the root of it all was actually education. The education is not sort of fit for purpose, and we need to find a way of disrupting the education system. So this kind of coincided with my entrepreneurship journey as well. And what I saw at the time was, well, hang on, we're living in a time where the biggest industries have been disrupted by technology. So Airbnb have disrupted the hotel industry. Amazon and eBay have disrupted the retail industry. Uber have disrupted the taxi industry. So I was like, okay, well, maybe we can, through technology, we can disrupt this 200-year-old beast of the education industry through mobilizing the masses. Essentially, Uber made every car can become a taxi, or Airbnb made every house could be a hotel. So we were like, well, every Muslim could be a teacher. And so that's what we created. We created an edtech platform, a two-side course and content marketplace, so Muslims could share what they know with others in a bite-sized, digestible way. And so our belief was very much, everyone's got something to learn, everyone's got something to teach. We worked on that for a while with the platform still live. But one of the things we struggled with is a lack of funding. And so obviously it's very Muslim-centric, and so we said that, look, we need to find, this is part of our mission, we need to make this happen. So in the absence of funds, we need to find another way to get users to our site. And so we became very content-centric. So this is one of the things that this shows, is that the power of a mission, the power of vision. Like, you don't give up, you just think, okay, let me find another way to figure it out. And so this is, we've been very driven for years and years. And so this is where in 2019, the idea for this second golden age project was born, which was aimed at reviving the spirit of the first golden age and then inspiring and education a new generation of thought and ideas. And so that takes us to kind of the modern day. So that's a bit of the backstory. So that takes us to this first part, which is looking at our history. So the first part we're going to be looking at is understanding our legacy and the golden age of Islam. So why study history, right? Why? So here's a question for you. Who would you say is considered the most powerful nation in the world today? So who would you consider? Now, it's a bit of a trick question because most people would say that China, in terms of pound for pound, is probably one of the most powerful nations today. Now, they've become obviously a beast of a nation now that they've finally unlocked and unleashed the potential of their population and their natural resources. And what's happening today is, in terms of the resurgence of the East, is mainly the world's natural order correcting itself. The Western domination of the last few hundred years is only a recent phenomenon and actually was engineered through like colonialism and wars and things like that. But throughout the history, it was the nations of the East like China, India, and Persia that were traditional powerhouses where natural resources and populations were abundant. And their domination has actually been strategically planned since the 80s, all with a focus on becoming the dominant player within 50 years through relentless economic growth. One way they did this, for example, is by subsidizing factories for their own citizens. I remember when I went there, I've been there a few times now, but 2015, 2016, my own supplier said to me, he goes, oh, in my class, university class, there's only 3 of us out of a class of 30 that didn't go on to open our own factory. And because he was like, in these 80s and 90s, they made it so easy. They just threw money at us, oh, go and open your factory, go and open your factory, go and open your factory. So they knew that you rule the world through primarily economic power. And that's something that Ibn Khaldun, who's known as the father of history, also mentioned in Al-Muqaddimah. This is what he said: businesses owned by responsible and organized merchants shall eventually surpass those owned by wealthy rulers. But on another note entirely, right? Which of these apps would you say is the most popular? So hopefully you can see the screen. So we have TikTok, we have a WeChat, and then we have some random Chinese one. So most people would probably guess TikTok, especially with today. But it's actually the one on the right, the random one. It's pronounced, I don't know how it's pronounced actually, Juju Zhango, I think. But, and obviously it was a bit of a trick question. But what this app is, it means study and strengthen the nation. And it's a Chinese history and identity app, which tells people about their history, their philosophy, their leader, their political ideologies, etc. So they get to know themselves. Right. So this was launched in January 2019, and by April, it was outperforming both TikTok and WeChat in terms of downloads. And even at various points throughout 2020 and 21, it was top of the charts, which is crazy. You think about how many people live in that country. It's crazy. Is this coincidence or is this strategic? Now, obviously, it's been encouraged and incentivized by the government, but it's still very interesting and vitally important because of what it represents. Now, the current way of learning history. Now, think back to when you're at school. When it comes to like the really interesting, good subjects to study, what comes to mind? Sometimes it's the STEM subjects, science and maths and technology and stuff, or it might be politics or medicine or engineering or even law. Basically, it's those subjects that are linked to future power or status and wealth. Like Dr. Adil said, it's my son's going to do this and my son's going to do that. But history is not really thought of. It's thought of a bit of a boring. We think of like really old school teachers, who are geeks, and most people think, what can you do with it career wise? Because that's how we think now. So what can we do with it career wise? I actually studied history at A level, and I did British history, European history. We studied a little bit of the Greeks, the Battle of Hastings, the Tudor and Stuarts, and the Victorian era, all through to the World Wars. That was just our normal curriculum. But at A level, for some reason, we studied the Bolsheviks and modern Russian history. No idea why. We also studied propaganda and Hitler's extensive use of it. But it didn't really do anything for me. It was just okay, yeah, and what? But when I started learning about Islamic history, it just started to bring things to life. It gave me an understanding of what came before in our own culture. I started to realize its power. it's no coincidence that when often when a country is invaded, such as the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, the first thing they do is destroy the museums and the galleries. Because if you can cut off people from their own rich heritage, you can recreate the history you want them to believe. And that way you can control them. This is a really important quote. Throughout history, many nations have suffered a physical defeat, but that has never marked the end of a nation. When a nation becomes a victim of a psychological defeat, then that marks the end of a nation. So this is what was done, for example, to the black slaves that were brought over from Africa to America. So they completely cut them off from their identity and their roots. So they were psychologically defeated for hundreds of years. And this psychological defeat has actually also happened to us, sadly. And that perhaps explains our current malaise as an Ummah. The problem is, if you don't seek it out and study your own history, the version you're likely to come across is going to be flawed, it's going to be whitewashed, or it's going to have been rewritten or censored from the actual reality. History is always written by the winners. I think it was Winston Churchill that said that. And when two cultures clash, the loser is obliterated and the winner writes the history books which glorify their own cause and disparage the conquered foe. Napoleon once said, "What is history but a fable agreed upon?" And knowledge is power. And if unchallenged, the powerful will always write the version of history they want you to hear. So if you write people out of history, it's easier to write them out of the future. Malcolm X. So he said that history is a people's memory. And without a memory, a man is demoted to the lower animals. So this is why studying history is so important. There's so much that we've just left in school textbooks, national curriculum to teachers, and we've just accepted it because of a lack of interest or a lack of alternative solutions. But much of it does not portray the real picture. Obviously, one example, which I'm sure we're going to go through today, is the history of science and the extremely deep, rich Muslim legacy of it. But the irony of it all is science is seen as a height of modern day intellect, and it's used as a stick to beat Islam with. People say, "Oh, what Nobel Prizes have you won in the last century? And what inventions have you done recently?" But not knowing that Muslims have actually, we've invented algorithms and algebra and all sorts. But if you don't know this stuff, that's why young people are growing up with a massive inferiority complex and a whitewashed worldview. That's why we need to go back to the history books and relook at the real story. It's even mentioned in the Quran. I mean, Dr. Adil mentioned this earlier. The Quran is full of stories of history, and it constantly implores the reader to learn from the past, to learn the lessons of those who were good and avoid the mistakes of those who went astray. And even some of the historical accounts are only known to us through the Quran. These verses say that if Prophet Muhammad was not a true prophet, he would not have known these historical accounts. So, for example, in this one, and you were not on the side of the mount when we called Moses, but this knowledge that we revealed to you is a mercy from your Lord to warn people to whom no warner before you came. And so history within the Quran and Hadith also provides us with lesson, with context, with aspirations, and a framework to follow for success. I mean, here's an example. Right? Ray Dalio, who's a famous, successful hedge fund manager, and he was an author of a famous book called Principles. He owes all his success to studying history. What he did was, obviously he was buying stocks and things like that, but he developed an algorithm, and that algorithm was programmed to look at historical patterns, and then based on X, it would buy, and based on this, it would sell. And so his belief is that, look, history repeats itself, so I'm going to program it just to look at history. That's it. And could we do that? Not in terms of stocks, but in general. Obviously, I just showed a picture of Ertugrul there. And a really quick story. This is a few years ago. My dad, he loved movies, especially kung fu, like Bruce Lee type films and stuff. But he stopped watching them. Ever since he watched Ertugrul, he basically stopped after that. He just said that, look, when our own history is so amazing and you got heroes like that inspire you, why should I watch something now that doesn't relate to me? And also, last year, or the year before, Ertugrul Mania took over Pakistan. It broke record after record, most YouTube subscribers in the month. And it's not the only history show that's captivated the Muslim world. Obviously, Turkey is at the forefront of this new wave. Politically, it's powerful. So Erdogan was influential in commissioning a huge budget towards the production of these historical media series. So Ertugrul being one, Osman being another, Yunus Emre, Abdul Hamid. And it's not just had an impact at home, but it's extremely successful export all around the world. And in the same time period, interestingly, Turkey's identity has gone from being an extremely secular liberal country, almost desperate to join the EU, to quite a strong independent state, proud of its Islamic roots. The hearts and minds have been won. Is that all that a coincidence? And obviously, this was obviously last year at some point, but a new joint venture between Pakistan, Malaysia, and Turkey was announced, dedicated to original media and content. Not sure if that's still the case. So how can history benefit us? So what does a strong understanding of history give you? Give you a strong sense of self, an identity, roots, stability, and role models and heroes, greatness to aspire to, stories to relate to. If all of these things for you are weak, if you don't really have a strong sense of identity, you don't really have any role models, you'll adopt role models that aren't necessarily the best for you. You'll adopt the wrong identity, because we're all desperate for an identity. You'll just adopt the wrong one. So we need to look at what is relevant for us, what we relate to, instead of cricketers and footballers and movie stars and pop stars. More than anything, it will give you confidence and pride in who you are, so that nobody can make you feel inferior or question your right to exist or to do whatever you aspire to do. So it gives you belief and confidence. You have a framework, you have a reference point. After all, if someone with your background or heritage has achieved such and such and overcome huge tribulations, why can't you? I'm going to give you a really random, silly example, but you get the point. Right. For example, in the 80s and 90s, hip hop or rap, there was two powerhouses. So you had New York in the East and you had LA in the West. So everyone knew that these are the two main places where hip hop is made, etc. Right. And so everywhere else in America was the avid fans, but nobody was producing anything. It was because there was no precedent and stuff. So everyone knew, oh no, you're either from New York or you're either from the East or you're from the West. But what happened was that a group from the South, they got signed and they got in the charts. As soon as they were signed, the floodgates opened. Because people, oh my God, like one of our guys is there. You know what, we can do it as well. And then there was, and to the point where today, the South is considered the most popular of all the powerhouses in that stuff. So again, silly example, but you can see how the importance of precedent. So another one of the main reasons is that patterns and trends often repeat themselves. You can see the warning signs ahead of time, and you can learn what to do or what not to do. History repeats itself. It has to. No one listens. So what do we need to do from here on in? We need to learn about the history of the world, how money used to work, how governments have used propaganda, how medicine used to be. At least that way you have an alternative to refer back to instead of the madness often brought upon us. I remember, just a side note, there was a book that I had on my shelf here somewhere. It was a 13th century translated, it was like a encyclopedia of the 13th century, but it had been translated into English. And honestly, reading it, it was like a time warp. It was like, oh my God, like this is how they thought then. And it's amazing because so much of it was on point and it's so deep and so it's just really fascinating. You learn about the greats of the past, not to glorify the past for the sake of it, but to bring the best from it into today. Why is the seerah so important? Why do we need to learn from the prophets as an example and the Sahaba? It's because, again, there's lessons for them to learn for us. What is history really but the study of self? You don't know where you're going until you know where you've been. So for true greatness, you have to study what makes you you. Learn about where you come from, yourself, your heritage, your historical icons. Learn what came before, and then that way you can take off often the propaganda that we're fed. The modern day is best, or we've never living in better times than we are today. But ultimately, it just comes down to that age-old wisdom. Know thyself is the beginning of wisdom. So the Chinese, as you can see, they know the importance of knowing themselves, and that self-identity and understanding roots is a key part of what forms a strong society. Prophet Muhammad also said, know yourself to know your Lord. Ultimately, that's our ultimate destination. We want to know our Lord. That is what gives our soul contentment and happiness. So knowing yourself is critical. So it's time for us in the Islamic world and as Muslims to pay attention if we want to obviously bring about this second golden age, inshallah. So I'll just leave with this. Take lessons from history for your future, because history repeats itself. Imam Ali said that. So over to Sabrine, who's going to go through the science and technological revolution.
Can you see my screen now, inshallah? Yeah.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Okay, so I want to talk about, obviously the topic is the technological revolution, the scientific revolution, and I gave you a brief sort of background into how the scientific revolution that we know of today, what we studied in our books, that's the European scientific revolution, but it wasn't the scientific revolution. It certainly wasn't the first scientific revolution. I want to talk about the scientific revolution that led to that scientific revolution, and it is the Islamic scientific revolution. We're going to go into why it should be called the first one. I'm going to give